And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
It was supposed to be another record-breaking year for Las Vegas. A new 4,000-room hotel opened in March. Tickets for shows featuring Adele and U2 were selling like hotcakes. Economists were optimistic about the recovery of tourism after the pandemic slump, but by mid-summer 2025, panic had set in. Officially, there were 2 million fewer tourists in 6 months. Unofficially, the number was even higher. And this was not a temporary decline. It was a prolonged storm that suddenly engulfed the iconic city silently, without warning, without disaster, but with consequences that are only beginning to be felt. On the streets of Vegas, there are empty tables in street cafes, taxi drivers who wait 40 minutes without a fare, and tourists who increasingly look at prices with an expression of complete bewilderment. A basic hotel room that cost $129 a night 3 years ago now costs no less than $340. And that's without taxes, fees, and the so-called resort fee, which often exceeds $50 per day. Gifts, compliments, free dinners, and casino tickets are gone. Instead, there are strict rules, restrictions, and a feeling that the city no longer needs you. Or maybe it just forgot how to welcome you.
There's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
The most alarming thing is not just the drop in the number of guests. It's the change in atmosphere. A city where people were recently shouting with joy after winning is now filled with silence. The sound of coins in slot machines has been replaced by an electronic click that evokes no emotion. Casino employees are admitting for the first time that they don't feel like they're part of the celebration. Their shifts are being cut, tips are falling, and smiles are becoming increasingly mechanical. And all this is happening against the backdrop of official data that is worrying even the White House. According to people close to Donald Trump, he was shocked by the figures when he was told about the scale of the decline. This means that the problem is no longer just a local one.
That's a 10. That's a good one.
But what is the reason? Why are Europeans, who have been coming here for years with a budget of $10,000, $15,000 for a weekend, leaving? Why are Canadians, who considered Las Vegas their second Florida, now choosing Toronto or even Montreal? Why have Americans themselves, even from neighboring California, started canceling their trips? Is it all about money? Or is Las Vegas losing something more important than revenue, its magic?
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
Today, we will not just try to understand what happened to a city that once symbolized freedom, luxury, and eternal celebration. We will try to understand whether this is the beginning of the end of an era. Because if Las Vegas is a mirror of the American dream, then the cracks in that mirror are not just about tourism. They are about all of us. Welcome to Vegas 2025. Are you ready to see what lies behind the neon lights?
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, you know, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it, is hundreds of billions of dollars. The
we just
numbers
told-
that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
It all started with an alarming figure in a Smith Travel Research report. In June 2025, hotel occupancy rates in Las Vegas fell almost 15%, and in July the situation worsened. This data could have been seen as a temporary blip amid global economic trends, but within a few weeks it became clear that this was not a temporary dip, but a systemic problem. By the end of the first half of the year, tourist traffic to Las Vegas had fallen by more than 2 million people compared to the same period in 2024.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
For a city where tourism accounts for up to 80% of the economy, this is not just an alarm signal, it is the beginning of a crisis. The first blow came unnoticed. In early spring, corporate events began to be cancelled one after another, followed by a drop in bookings from foreign tourists.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
The losses were most noticeable among visitors from Europe, Canada, and Japan categories that traditionally bring the city the most revenue. June alone saw a drop of 340,000 international visits. And although tourists from neighboring states continued to visit, their average spend was 38% lower than that of foreign visitors.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
Las Vegas was not just losing crowds, it was losing its money-spending audience. The flagship casinos were particularly hard hit: Bellagio, MGM Grand, and Caesars Palace. Previously, complimentary rooms and show tickets were handed out for a single evening at the gaming tables.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Now, high roller players receive 60% fewer bonuses than in 2022. According to veterans, the atmosphere has changed. The excitement has disappeared. When playing blackjack meant not only risk, but also the promise of evening champagne in the VIP lounge. Casino owners are keeping quiet, but internal sources speak of a profound reassessment of operating costs and attempts to maintain profits by cutting back on customer spending.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
At the same time, less noticeable but more worrying shifts began to take place on the other side of town. Harry Reid Airport recorded its fourth consecutive month of declining passenger traffic. In June alone, there were 270,000 fewer arrivals. This means not only empty waiting rooms, but also hundreds of cancelled flights, thousands of unoccupied hotel rooms, and millions of dollars not spent in restaurants, clubs, and taxis. According to city council estimates, the economy loses up to $280 million in direct and indirect revenue in a single month like this. Meanwhile, local residents are beginning to feel the changes. Bartender Jeremy Morales, who has been working on the Strip for the past 12 years, admits that he used to leave his shift with $400 in tips. Now he's lucky to get $120. It's not just a drop in income, it's a threat to his livelihood. In a city where most workers rely on tips more than their salaries, every downturn has a ripple effect. Fewer tips mean fewer expenses. Less spending means a blow to small businesses. Inflation has also hit hard. The cost of housing within 10 miles of the Strip has risen 14% in a year. Many hotel and restaurant employees have begun to leave the city, crossing the state line in search of cheaper housing. In July alone, Las Vegas lost 8,000 service workers, including waiters, drivers, and maids. For the first time in 15 years, the industry faced a paradox: fewer guests, but still not enough staff. The authorities are trying to respond. In July, the creation of a crisis response team was announced, whose task will be to review pricing policies, develop loyalty programs, and stimulate international tourism. However, independent analysts are skeptical. A closed report for informal discussion within the Senate Subcommittee on Tourism mentioned that Las Vegas could lose another 1.5 million tourists by the end of 2025. If this forecast comes true, it will no longer be just a decline in revenue, it will be a full-blown economic shock. Even the biggest players in the industry are showing signs of alarm. One of the vice presidents of Caesars Entertainment admitted in an anonymous interview that for the first time in a decade, the possibility of temporarily closing several restaurants and shows is being considered. Such measures were taken only once before during the pandemic. Only now there is no pandemic, no hurricane, no external enemy. There is only emptiness. People are not coming, and no one really understands why. In search of reasons, experts point to a broader phenomenon: changing tourist behavior. Over the past 2 years, there has been a sharp increase in the number of travelers who prefer short trips with an emphasis on experience rather than glamour. Las Vegas, built on grandeur, is struggling to adapt. While other cities are already offering combined packages with an emphasis on sustainability, technology, and local flavor, Vegas is still betting on shows and slot machines. But perhaps the most alarming signal comes not from the numbers and reports, but from the mood of the tourists themselves. In July, a tourist from Chicago left a review on one of the platforms, writing, "I love Vegas. But this year it felt different. More control, more rules, less magic." Such reviews are becoming more and more common. And if a city that symbolizes freedom begins to be associated with disappointment, it's no longer about the economy. It's a loss of soul. That's why a question that once seemed impossible is now being asked more and more. What if Las Vegas really is starting to lose its magic? Not all at once, not in the news, but imperceptibly, drop by drop, step by step. In every decision, in every price increase, in every tourist who chose to stay home this year. Perhaps this is not a decline. Perhaps we are witnessing the end of an era. The decline in tourist traffic has not only been a blow to the city's wallet, it has been the beginning of a deeper identity crisis. Las Vegas, which for decades existed as the epitome of American carefree luxury, found itself in a situation where its key symbols, noisy casinos, famous shows, and abundant discounts no longer evoked the same response. For many visitors, especially those who had been there before, the experience was no longer unique. It had become predictable, expensive, and, worst of all, emotionally empty. At a time when global tourism trends were shifting toward experiences rather than consumption, Vegas continued to rely on an outdated model: temptation, money, and spectacle. Meanwhile, competitors were not just sitting idly by, they had already pulled ahead. While Las Vegas was fighting for the survival of old formats, Dubai invested in X-Resorts, where every hotel room was equipped with a virtual reality system that allowed guests to travel anywhere in the world without leaving their suite. Singapore launched a sustainable tourism program where every tourist could offset their carbon footprint and receive tax breaks on accommodation and meals in return. In Macau, casinos began to introduce personalized services based on customer behavior analysis using artificial intelligence. And in Las Vegas, keys are still handed out manually at the front desk. This is symbolism that cannot be ignored. City marketers tried to change the image. The old slogan, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," was replaced with a more flexible but far less exciting one. "What happens here only happens here." It was supposed to convey uniqueness, but it didn't really work. According to internal surveys of millennials and Gen Z, only 12% of respondents could remember the new slogan 2 weeks after their trip. This is a disastrous result considering that the previous phrase had become a cultural meme. Young tourists no longer perceive Vegas as a place of freedom. For them, it is a city where everything is too expensive, too formal, and not tailored to their interests. Advertising campaigns launched in mid-2025 featuring influencers failed. After 3 months, the reach was half the forecast, and the conversion rate was less than 0.8%. Moreover, some of the campaigns provoked a negative reaction. Users were annoyed by attempts to sell culture and spirituality in a city where every other billboard still advertises slot machines and drunken parties. The image of the city was split into two opposing halves. On the one hand, elite concerts at Sphere, and on the other, aggressive mass marketing. Between them lay a void that marketers were unable to fill. However, the most pressing issue was technology. While other tourist capitals were switching to biometric identification systems, personalized content, and dynamic real-time pricing, Vegas was stuck in the 2015 model. Only 9% of hotels were equipped with intelligent demand management systems, and digital city navigation and event ticket booking services were either intermittent or had no mobile apps at all. As a result, young travelers accustomed to managing their trips from their smartphones felt like they were in a museum in Las Vegas, where everything is beautiful but not for them. Add to that another less obvious factor, reputation. At a time when global tourists were increasingly asking questions about ethics, ecology, and the meaning of travel, Vegas was losing on all fronts. Even tourists who liked the extravagance and excess began to notice that there was no sustainable architecture, no local products, and no sense of authenticity. Everything seemed like a stage set. Everything is designed not for you, but against you. And if this used to be part of the game, now it is an annoying element. And this is where the crisis began to enter its next phase. First, international visitors stopped coming. Then business clients. Then families. And finally, young people. One by one, the segments that had kept things stable disappeared. Some analysts call this the identity domino effect, where each segment that leaves pulls with it the infrastructure that was geared toward it. This is how shows for families with children are disappearing. Designer clothing stores are closing. Fine dining restaurants are disappearing. And with them go the employees, suppliers, and event organizers. Against this backdrop, words that seemed impossible just a short time ago are now being heard. Vegas is an outdated symbol. At a closed forum in Macau in June 2025, the CEO of one of the world's largest hotel chains said, "Las Vegas must not simply be revamped. It must reinvent itself from scratch, or it will become the new Atlantic City, a myth of former greatness." These words went viral in industry circles, but in Las Vegas itself, they were ignored. Meanwhile, on social media, where the perceptions of entire generations are formed, Vegas increasingly began to appear as a place not worth visiting a second time. Young TikTokers filmed videos about how they lost $600 in one evening and got nothing but fatigue and irritation. The comments were scathing. Las Vegas is like an ex you went back to, and everything got worse. This is not just resentment, it is a loss of emotional connection. And that is where the deepest threat lies. Not in competition with Singapore or Dubai. Not in lost profits. It's that a city built on a sense of exclusivity now feels mundane. The magic that for decades was sustained by the promise of the unforgettable has become predictable. And if it's gone, all that's left is an empty stage under the neon lights. While economists argued about the nature of the crisis, the city began to act. Las Vegas seemed to be cornered. The statistics were frightening, tourists were leaving, and investments were drying up. But in its typical manner, it did not go quietly. On the contrary, the city embarked on an aggressive reform. The bet was made that salvation would not come from returning to the past, but from creating a new present. A transformation plan was urgently developed, rumored to be backed by 3 large venture capital funds, including one that financed the construction of the first private space hotel in the UAE. They formed a consortium and put forward an idea not to revive Vegas, but to literally recode its perception. It all started with a large-scale program to launch a new nighttime economy. Within a few months, 8 new venues were opened, focused not on gambling and alcohol, but on technology, digital art, and immersive shows. The most high-profile premiere was an installation called Eclipse 24, in which guests could live a digital version of their lives based on their social media profiles. The project went viral, receiving over 100 million views on TikTok and attracting a young audience that would never have gone to a casino but came for the content and hype. For the first time in a long time, Las Vegas began to speak the language of Generation Z. At the same time, venues for international sporting events began to be built in the city. In February 2025, a contract was signed to host the Super Bowl in Las Vegas for 2 years in a row, an agreement that caused outrage among rival cities, but brought the city the attention it craved. UFC fights, the NBA Summer League, and Formula One races all became part of a new matrix in which sports and entertainment were integrated into a single mechanism. Tickets were sold as combined packages, a match, a gastronomic tour, and a live concert. They were complex and expensive, but designed with the habits of the modern audience in mind.